Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Let's dig a little bit deeper today into Crowdstrike. You know, the company that pretty much has, with the self-inflicted distributed denial of service, taken out 24,000 customers and roughly millions of Windows machines around the world, which happened yesterday on the 19th of July. But let's put Crowdstrike under scrutiny. Let's really understand what Crowdstrike is all about. Let's look at the background, the history, the political connections, the corporate partnerships, and let's all a little bit dig deep into this recent incident that's basically grounded over 18,000 flights. It's created havoc with companies and banks and transport systems and hospitals and pharmaceutical companies and pharmacies themselves and all sorts of corporate organizations, because they've got a 24,000 customer base across the world, which is a huge footprint. And let's dig underneath the hood. Let's see what's really behind Crowdstrike and get an understanding of their geopolitical sort of presence in the world. So I've prepared a little presentation for you, just to give you a little bit of insight into Crowdstrike so you can get an idea of what we're talking about here. And you're more than welcome to download the PDF for free. I'm not going to ask for contact information or email addresses. Just click the link. It'll just download the PDF. It's good for reference. All right, let's take you into this. And essentially what we're going to take a look at is how Crowdstrike effectively is actually very well and connected and influential with even the World Economic Forum, which is rather fascinating. Let's pop my screen over here. And we can examine the geopolitical events, decent sort of intersection between how they operate in terms of politics, corporate influence, and just in terms of today, the modern sort of landscape of cybersecurity. So let's dig a little bit deeper. So Crowdstrike's recent global computer crash, it's a terrible result for Crowdstrike. On July the 19th, 2024, which was yesterday, Crowdstrike found itself at the center of a massive technological meltdown that sent shockwaves through the global aviation industry specifically, and then it hit a whole lot of other corporate companies around the world like banking, transport systems, medical and hospital systems, and you name it. So it was a defective content update for Windows hosts and machines released by the cybersecurity firm team that they have, triggering basically a catastrophic breakdown in Windows operating systems. And this cascaded right across the world, and it's resulted in just the brief information that we currently have, which is, it's going to take us a long time to try and really discover the final damage on this, but over 18,000 flights were grounded worldwide. Banks were down, hospitals were down, pharmacies were down, transportation systems and retailers went down. It's well over 24,000 customers and across more than 100 sectors globally, causing this unprecedented disruption in all sorts of things like air travel and company productivity and all that. And it highlights the fragility of how cybersecurity is, right? And this incident actually raises a very serious question about Crowdstrike. You know, when you have security measures that are taken into consideration, and don't get me wrong, Crowdstrike is a phenomenal piece of software that sits on a system and it does real-time threat analytics, it does incident handling, it handles all sorts of machine learning underneath to pretty much do a good job. But what they didn't do very well at Crowdstrike is a couple of things from what I can see. Being a security professional myself for 37 years now, the unit testing that should have been done wasn't done right and probably wasn't done incomplete. And more importantly, the directors and CEO of the company, especially George Kurtz, apart from his blatant gaslighting on social media, which is, I found, very pathetic, the outcome of this truly shows that someone signed off on this update, and whoever did sign off this on this update, well, is not just more accountable for all of this, but probably knew what the problem is, because there's no way the size of this company, Crowdstrike, $84 billion, to have made an update mistake like this without have gone through and tested this kind of update across hundreds of systems on offline systems rather than online live systems, and then approve the whole process to be issued out globally. That, to me, as a company, Crowdstrike, first of all, it doesn't make any sense. So this demands an audit by the shareholders of the company, because I'm sure the shareholders are, trembling in their boots today because it's definitely lost a lot of shares in the stock exchange. But this event is a stark reminder that, the immense responsibility by these companies, that apart from protecting companies, they've got to basically ensure 100% uptime and a self-inflicted distributed denial of service, which is what this is. It truly is. Whether it's an attack from hackers, which is coordinated, or whether it's something like self-inflicted, nevertheless, this is a distributed denial of service. And whether George Kurtz, the CEO, doesn't want to admit it because he's been an absolute irrational CEO at the moment, gaslighting people online and with companies on social media, the truth of the matter is very simple. You guys at Crowdstrike are completely accountable for this mess around the world, and you have to be taken to task. There has to become a situation where you've got to be taken for an audit. You've got to understand policies, procedures, and protocols need to be followed when you make these updates, especially when they go global. And most importantly, risk analysis, risk management has to be very, very well scrutinized. And more importantly, there is no sign-off until it's been tested thoroughly. So all these things have failed in Crowdstrike, which is a fascinating thing because Crowdstrike is not known for failure. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Crowdstrike's role, for example, let's look at a little bit of history. In 2016, its major role was in the 2016 US presidential election. Crowdstrike's involvement in investigating the alleged hacks of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and all their servers during the 2016 US presidential election sort of catapulted this company into the political spotlight. Their forensic analysis, which they've always been very good at, so I'm not dissing Crowdstrike here, they've always been very good at, and I use their systems, pointed out to Russian state-sponsored actors as culprits behind this cyber intrusion and ignited a firestorm of controversy and political debate that basically shapes American politics today. The company's findings became a cornerstone of subsequent sort of Russian investigations, and essentially it really shows the potential of all this collusion between, say, Trump campaign and Russian operatives. Well, this is what supposedly came out. We're not entirely 100% true understanding. We don't have a truth understanding of everything because, well, there's been a lot of evidence that's been falsified. There's been a lot of misinformation, which means there's information that's missing. There's a lot of disinformation being pushed out during this process, and you can't entirely trust this whole process. But June 2016, Crowdstrike investigated the DNC server hacks, supposed hacks, and identified potentially Russian involvement. 2016 again, July, DNC emails were leaked out, spanking basically controversy with the presidential campaign. And May 2017, like a year later roughly, the special counsel Mueller pointed sort of to the Russian sort of investigation, also pushed this a lot forward. So you could see there's a lot of things behind Crowdstrike that we don't know. And in March 9, 2019, the Mueller report actually released, citing Crowdstrike's findings, which is rather interesting. And it's a very interesting read for you to go through. Now, here's something really interesting a lot of people don't know. Crowdstrike's partnership is a lot deeper than just IT companies. They are very well connected with the World Economic Forum. You know, their involvement in the WEF began in 2015, when the organization named it, basically, the WEF named Crowdstrike their technology pioneer. This sort of recognition marked the beginning of deep and enduring partnerships between, say, cybersecurity firms like Crowdstrike and governments pretty much around the world. So over the years, this whole collaboration has been very interesting because it's been expanding and it's encompassing various sort of initiatives, trying to combat, of course, as the primary directive, cybercrime and enhancing sort of digital security globally. One of the key areas, though, the key areas of focus in this partnership has been the integration of AI into cybersecurity solutions, which I'm a big proponent of artificial intelligence and then the machine learning underneath all of that, because there is a time and a place to use AI, but not to completely rely on it, because it has problems, it has faults, it can only do as good as we train it to do. So this is where Crowdstrike has leveraged this expertise, which they've done a good job till today, or till yesterday. And they contributed towards WEF sort of initiatives. And this collaboration hasn't only bolstered Crowdstrike's sort of reputation as an industry leader, but it's given the company a platform to sort of shape global cybersecurity policies and strategies alongside all the leaders around the world. So it's got a massive global influence, shaping international policies around the world. It's got a huge AI integration option, which is very advanced, and it's a particularly good set of tools, and it is very well designed and surprisingly hasn't had that many problems. But this collaboration and partnership between corporate companies and government is something to scrutinize, because there is no oversight committee that basically can check and see and audit these companies, which kind of stresses people out around the world and many other CEOs in the companies. Okay, they're very good at cybercrime prevention to date, but obviously they're not very good at dealing with risk analysis correctly, and certainly not with self-inflicted mistakes, which was truly a disaster of what happened yesterday, an absolute disaster. Now, here's something that maybe other people also don't know, a lot of you, and that is, by the way, just so you understand, there is a massive amount of money or clout behind Crowdstrike and its organizations that I've mentioned before in previous videos, like Vanguard. And they own roughly 12% of the company, shaping pretty much Crowdstrike accordingly. And Vanguard is not the only one. BlackRock and State Street also own percentage. And this is a significant stake, though, because it also must raise questions about sort of market control and influence in cybersecurity. Vanguard's position as a major player is passive, right? But at the end of the day, though, the ownership that they have, they can dictate direction. And even though this ownership is interesting, critics sort of argue such a large ownership is not a necessarily good thing because it's highly influential. And as we all know, well, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street currently control $335 trillion of the total 420 trillion dollars of the world's money. And when you have 3 or 4 companies controlling the world's money, and they control a very big stake in companies like Crowdstrike, which are very well embedded in 24,000 companies and millions of Microsoft Windows machines across 100 sectors and plus, you have to question the stability in terms of long-term, and more importantly, mistakes that can happen based on decision making, which is what's happened yesterday. So very interesting background, and if you dig a little bit further into Vanguard and Crowdstrike, you're going to get to see some interesting details. Let's look at also the political connections. Crowdstrike's political connections extend beyond its role in 2016 when they became prominent in the industry. There's a lot of reports that have surfaced which are really interesting, and they have been backed up with actual documentation which surfaced that Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the House, and we know who she is, and a prominent figure in the Democratic Party, owns significant shares in this company, Crowdstrike. That must strike you as very interesting, because why would a government official be allowed to have very much a huge stake in a corporate company which shapes global policies Isn't that a conflict of interest? Sounds like it is to me. This revelation has added another layer of scrutiny to CrowdStrike's operations and decisions, raising sort of questions about conflicts, right? We know this, and political sort of agendas, which rather is stressful at the moment. On the other side of the political scale, of course, President Donald Trump has been vocal against, or as a critic of CrowdStrike, and he has questioned the company's role in the DNC server investigation, and rightfully so, because, well, where was the directive? Where was the authorization that was taking place? How did they manage to get all the evidence and actually falsify and have misinformation and so much disinformation during this court case? You have to question these things. You know, the whole idea of questioning this DNC server investigation and the decisions not to allow the FBI direct access to the servers, because this would reveal information on how CrowdStrike operates, kind of raises very interesting concerns, just questions that we have. I'm sure there's nothing nefarious, but we still need to have more transparency, correct? So Trump's comments during a phone call with the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, right, in which he mentioned CrowdStrike, became a key point of contention, a very key point of contention and a bone of contention during this impeachment inquiry that's been going on, which of course is failing outright miserably. These political entanglements sort of highlight this complexity of relationships, this web of interesting, non-transparent relationships between, of course, CrowdStrike and other cybersecurity firms and government entities and political figures. And that is a major concern, because it's not necessarily democratic, is it? I mean, we talk about democratic connections, but Nancy Pelosi's report in terms of ownership of CrowdStrike and the shares raise interesting questions, and the influence with Donald Trump's case and the whole idea of leadership. And then, of course, Republicans, well, you know, Donald Trump's public sort of skepticism is kind of validated here and correct, because, well, what does CrowdStrike's role in this DNC hack investigation, and how has it fueled this whole process? Because there's credibility in question here. And really, when it comes to forensics, CrowdStrike needs to be neutral, because that's what forensics is all about. Forensics is about the truth and the evidence. It has nothing to do with proving someone and their particular character as a person. It's actually all about the evidence, and you have to prove whether someone is guilty or if they're innocent. You know, there's a two-sided problem to forensics. So just by CrowdStrike taking a side and pushing that particular agenda immediately indicates that they're not following procedures correctly, and they're violating one of the most important things, and that is chain of custody when it comes to forensics. I'm a forensics investigator myself, and I even teach students on this. I know exactly what I'm talking about here. Then there's another thing about the scrutiny we need to dig a little bit further with CrowdStrike, and that is their bipartisan scrutiny. You know, the idea of CrowdStrike's involvement in high-profile cybersecurity incidents has drawn attention from both sides, right, of the political aisle. And this is not just the United States, this is the United Kingdom, the whole of Europe. You know, we're looking at across the world here. And this is intensifying in discussions. And private companies have concerns, because these kind of raised alarms on national security measures and matters. And why should a corporate organization be involved in national security secrets is not very transparent, is it? It's not very democratic either. So very interesting details behind these. And then, you know, let's look at ethical considerations here, and most importantly, accountability. You know, this recent global computer crash in CrowdStrike's history of political entanglements has really brought two major issues together, and that is the viability of a company like CrowdStrike and its penetration in the industry, and of course the ethics and accountability in this industry are at the forefront. And, you know, private companies playing an increasing role in national security and global digital infrastructure policies is requiring an absolute mandatory transparency request from these companies across the world on Crowdstrike, because Crowdstrike has to become a lot more transparent and definitely has to be audited. I'm very surprised they've not been audited for this major self-inflicted distributed denial of service that happened yesterday on the 19th of July 2024. And it fascinates me, and I can understand why it isn't, because it's been backed by Vanguard and the rest of the big conglomerates, and it's being sort of brushed under the carpet, because you can see the gaslighting from the CEO of George Kurtz. I mean, the comments and the communications in social media are basically, they're absolutely nonsense. When it comes to solving a problem, you may fix your solution on your side, but you've got 24,000 customers with millions of machines that now cannot fix those systems remotely, because the damage that you've done is not going to allow these systems to boot up correctly, which means they cannot connect to any network. So this will require physical access to those systems. Do you understand, Crowdstrike, how bad this situation is? And of course, industry experts like myself and of course policymakers are calling really for stricter oversight. Absolutely, because it's got to be a more robust and more accountable measure that has to be taken to hold companies like Crowdstrike significantly over the barrel when it comes to things like this, because this is global pressure, this is global impact. And it's not even a coordinated attack by hackers. Can you imagine if there is weaknesses like this in just the implementation of a simple patch update, how impactful it will be when people like hackers discover actual bugs and exploits inside Crowdstrike, which by the way will obviously exist, because if anyone has understood anything about programming and development, there's always under construction work, because no matter what happens, there will always be a weakness somewhere. You cannot develop something in perfect working condition, because there's no such thing. There's no such thing as 100% risk-free. So either way, they have to be held to task and be audited for this. And this has to be an independent organization, not funded by companies like Vanguard and BlackRock. It has to be not just government issues, but it has to be regulated correctly. Not obviously too regulated, because we don't want to stifle the industry, but as the digital landscape sort of continues to evolve, we have to strike a better balance of innovation, security, and accountability combined with ethics. Because the public perception of Crowdstrike right now is Crowdstrike has become synonymous with this, and even the normies, which are not technical people, know who Crowdstrike is today. And that's not a good thing for the companies and any investors behind Crowdstrike, because effectively, if you look at it from a legal perspective, even the shareholders should be trembling, because effectively they have financed a global attack. Even though it was self-inflicted, they've basically paid for this. And this isn't very good news for shareholders either. So we're really looking at a number of things like transparency, 100%, and political neutrality, which has not been happening since 2016, which is very surprising. I've worked with Crowdstrike systems and I know how great they are. They are very, very, very powerful systems and very important to use, but this lack of transparency and the lack of this political siding and not being politically neutral makes Crowdstrike no longer forensically viable. Because when you're politically neutral, you can be forensically correct with any evidence gathering. Whereas if you're not, and you're siding with political parties and you're not politically neutral, you are no longer allowed, really, in many court cases and many courts in the world, to be a evidence collector or an expert witness or anything like that, or technical witness, because you are violating one of the most important principles of digital forensics, and that is politically neutral, independent both from victim and suspect neutrality, maintaining of customer integrity of data and chain of custody of the evidence. So they're violating these two things already. And What's fascinating about this attack, which it is an attack, even though they're saying this is not a hacker attack, at the moment there needs to be an investigation and there needs to be an audit. And what happens if this was an internal attack? How do we know? It's a question we must ask as cybersecurity professionals that are going out there right now, wasting time trying to sort these things out, which is going to take a long time. This question boils in all the security professionals' minds and IT professionals and IT admins, and that is, where did the rigorous testing go? Why were these updates not, or this small little update apparently, why was it not rigorously tested for weeks and months on parallel systems, not live systems, but necessarily production systems, before it was approved to be implemented globally? There has to be a more comprehensive validation process. And it's shocking, absolutely shocking, that Crowdstrike messed this up, because this should never be a compromise. Ever. It's what these tools are designed to protect against. And then, of course, there has to be a lot more neutrality over the public oversight. In other words, independents like myself and anybody who's independent must be allowed full-blown scrutiny over their procedures, their processes, the methods, the protocols, and all the necessary monitoring that's taking place on how they're doing things. When an attack like this happens, we need to be given transparency and access to that information with public oversight, because these systems are affecting public systems. They're affecting mission-critical systems around the world, and that is seriously dangerous to human life. Not just the daily operations of IT companies, but it's dangerous to human life. So we must call for much more transparency, political neutrality, rigorous testing, and definitely public oversight after something like this. So what's the future of cybersecurity and this whole idea of corporate responsibility? Well, very simple. And I've stated it in yellow as well here. And as you can see, the Falcon platform that we're talking about when it comes to Crowdstrike system is very, very well designed. Don't get me wrong, it is well put together, but you got to understand that because of what it does, it has to hook deep into a system right from the hardware level. And to be able to deal with things like endpoint security, cloud security, managing all the services, incident handling, all the operations, all the threat intelligence with AI and machine learning, the identifying of malware and all that sort of stuff that's happening, log management, the whole system, when it's actually as a full-blown platform that has to interact with workstations, laptops, PCs, mobile devices, servers, virtual machines, containers for storage, cloud solutions, IoT devices, right across the board. It has to have full-blown access, especially with Microsoft, all the way from the hardware layer. And a mistake like yesterday's mistake, which is a truly very bad situation for Crowdstrike, an update like that should have never been implemented without rigorous testing, at a minimum of 6 months of testing, and in parallel systems to the live systems prior to any update like this. And on top of that, it should never be tested on something like the holiday time, the time when there's least amount of people in IT companies trying to solve the problem. And worst of all, this is another sided problem, and that is, well, you know, it's not just that, it's the fact that now companies have to get a lot of IT people on the ground, boots on the ground, to fix the problems, because, well, the outage is requiring a situation or a fix that requires physical access. You cannot do this update remotely. It is not possible. In cloud solutions, it's a little easier because you're sitting in that cloud environment. But with regards to brick and mortar companies that they're not using cloud, which is the majority of companies, this is going to require a very serious effort over the next few weeks, if not a month. And I'm being very conservative here, to actually try and fix this problem. You know, the whole idea of moving forward is you've got to have a system that can be trusted. And not just, oh, highly technical, oh, it's got a lot of AI and machine learning. It mustn't just be, something that can do a great job. It needs to also be a type of system that, in terms of public perception, is also protected from itself. Because what we have is we have a double-edged sword right now. We have companies for the last 5 years during COVID until now have been outsourcing their IT services, outsourcing cybersecurity to other companies, outsourcing it to the sense that they are firing, and they have been firing and letting go of highly trained, hard-working IT professionals and security professionals in the whole remit of implementing machine learning, AI, and automation, all for one reason, and that is to save money so that their shareholders can make more money. That kind of attitude and situation, plus this mistake from the company they've been relying on for the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, okay, since 2016. In terms of having the cybersecurity protection in place, which, by the way, don't get me wrong, the system works and it does protect companies against the cyber threats. But what they didn't understand and they didn't do correctly, and this is an outright failure from George Kurtz as a CEO. There's no doubt about it. This is not just a failure because this thing happened. Yes, the teams that were involved in setting up these patches and the people who approved these patches, which has to be at the top levels, really are accountable. But the most important accountability is this, and that is, well, when it comes to oversight, when it comes to an implementation of a solution like this, what has to happen is internal auditing and external auditing, and the company has to be protected from itself because they are integrated into so many organizations, millions of systems online, and the fact that this decision took place puts Crowdstrike in a position where George Kurtz should have, way ahead of time, created a separate committee outside of Crowdstrike to monitor their practices and, more importantly, have transparency and oversight. And even more importantly, fully documented, fully tested, and final approvals by every single customer, 24,000 of them across hundreds of sectors across the globe and every single country in the world. Final approval for an update like this, which is an update that can render systems unusable. And there should have been a final confirmation and approval process that should have taken place. There's a failure outright from a CEO not to acknowledge this. And even worse, a failure is for Kurtz to be able to go online into social media, not be monitored, and to blurb out gaslighting information, which is basically pointless and nonsense, and ultimately doesn't serve the purpose except puts in a good light Crowdstrike and then passes the buck and the blame over to all the companies that are running Microsoft machines, and it's the Microsoft fault. But it isn't a Microsoft fault. This is 100% a Crowdstrike problem. And at the same time, because it's a double-edged sword, the problem with the companies around the world, CEOs and directors of those companies are greedy. They have let go of so many trained, hard-working professionals and have been relying on software like this, which shows that reliance on something that has potential for this kind of damage is a major risk flaw, a major risk miss in terms of company. And now these companies won't have enough boots on the ground. They're going to have to go and rehire IT staff to do this. And well, frankly, if I was an IT professional in a company and I've been told to leave and then 6 months later come back to fix things, I'd be demanding triple the amount of salary. I would be demanding these companies to not just hire me back, but I would be demanding a public apology. But the thing is, though, why is there no public oversight and no auditing taking place, and why are there no lawyers trying to enforce some form of audit and some form of legal court case? Probably because they're still collecting evidence. But the reason why is because you've got companies like Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street behind companies like Crowdstrike, and their political connections and the political motivations and their party siding indicates to all of us that, well, we're at the mercy and at the shackles of a company that actually has got very good software and it does a great job with what it's supposed to do, but it doesn't have its own auditing in place. It needs to clean house. Crowdstrike needs to be fully audited. It needs to have a full-blown committee established outside the company and not funded by any of the investors that fund the company. There has to be a new way of doing updates which are that kind of level update, especially on the Crowdstrike side. And with Microsoft, there needs to be far better scrutiny with systems, because they shouldn't just allow an update like this or an infiltration of a system that is at that hardware level to be able to do this kind of monitoring and real-time threat analytics. There has to be a better authentication and security level in Microsoft systems to not allow software like this to be at that lower level. And even worse, there has to be a callback for companies to basically, listen, you've got to rebuild your IT teams and stop outsourcing and stop just letting go of company resources like that, because you're going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And as that happens, God forbid, any major attack like a coordinated hacker attack, which is probably imminent right now, if that happens, then it's going to be a far bigger problem than you can possibly imagine. And you would be in a very much worse position where you potentially could be closed as a company, Crowdstrike. So, and all these other companies that are not hiring correctly and they're letting go of people, you will be compromised in such a way that you won't be able to recover from these. Because now you've got the problem of Crowdstrike doing this. Now you've got your problem where you don't have enough boots on the ground to actually sort this out, and IT professionals that know what they're doing, because this is not an easy fix. No matter what George Kurtz does when it comes to gaslighting the industries, it's not that simple of a fix. Believe me, one mistake inside system files and directory drivers and all that, and system drivers, you will render those systems completely unusable. And the fact that now companies have to bring back IT staff to go and fix this really indicates to me that there's also a failure with IT companies, normal organizations and corporate companies, because their CEOs and directors have made absolutely bad business decisions. And worse of all, why are these companies not having their backup solutions in place? Why don't they have backups in place so that they can recover a lot faster? What is going on with their teams? Well, if you're outsourcing your technology and you're outsourcing your IT, and then you assume that you're going to be able to do disaster recovery and essentially business continuity around this in the right time frame, I should say, you're under delusions. Because look at this now. There's 24,000 customers affected across 100+ sectors globally in every single country and every single city in the world. And you're looking at, just on the first 1 or 2 hours, 18,000 flights grounded in airports. You're looking at bank closures. People can't withdraw their money. They can't pay for food. They can't buy medication. They can't do very important things. Going into hospitals, can't do surgeries, can't get the pharmaceuticals dispensed. Pharmacies not functioning. Transportation systems not functioning. Stock exchange is not functioning. Trading halted. Listen, Crowdstrike and all directors and CEOs of all companies, stop looking at the picture from a financial gain only, because what you're about to face with this very small public update, which has created a global catastrophe in terms of mistake, is just the beginning. And if you continue down this road, I'm telling you, as a professional, I've been in this industry for 37 years and I work with so many companies around the world. You shouldn't have these problems, Crowdstrike. You have incredible software. It works really well. You have wonderful people in your company and teams that work exceptionally well. This kind of mistake is an oversight that should have never happened. And it should have never been approved as an update. And ultimately, the accountability rests with every single person who is in management, not technical people. Technical people would have never allowed an update like this to go through. Under no circumstances do I know anybody in the industry for the last 37 years who would ever, as a technical person, would have ever approved an update like this, because technology people are very, very in tune with protecting what they create. They don't want anyone messing around with what they've created. They're very territorial. The fact that this was approved as an update means to me that there's a complete and utter failure in the entire authentication approval process inside Crowdstrike. Because if it was just one little part, one area of Crowdstrike failing in a decision, another part in the chain within the process, procedures, policies would have picked this problem up, and it would have halted and it would have actually slowed the update. But it didn't, which means it was implemented and approved, and probably, from what we can see, seriously not well tested, if at all tested. So to me, it shows a complete failure in management. And that goes all the way up to the top with George Kurtz. And if I was a CEO right now of George Kurtz, first of all, I would not be gaslighting the world, but more importantly, putting a serious task force together to clean house, to absolutely clean house, and take your 84 billion that you have funded from Vanguard and every other company and start putting a fund together to start helping the companies that have been disadvantaged globally around the world, because they're going to require that kind of funding, which means if you don't do that, and if your insurance companies don't pay out, then you're going to have 24,000 customers creating lawsuits against you. In Crowdstrike, you can't afford that, considering you're at the moment at a very good position in terms of how good your software platform is. Falcon platform is phenomenal. It works really well, but obviously not in this scenario. And in this scenario, it is probably the most dangerous, because this is effectively an inside attack. And as we all know, I'm a security professional, I teach my students this all the time. The insider is the most dangerous individual malicious threat actor potentially possible in a company, far more dangerous than a hacker could ever be, because they're inside the company. And this kind of update should have never gone through, especially not at this busy time of the year. So I wanted to put this little PDF together and this little explanation just to give you a little bit of history behind Crowdstrike, and just show you there's an interesting sort of question behind how the company operates. There's definitely a lack of transparency. There's definitely a requirement for not siding with political companies and political parties. There needs to be political sort of neutrality here. There needs to be far better auditing procedures and policies and processes involved here. And there's definitely a lack of accountability and decision making. And it's a downright failure. And I don't know how long this is going to take to fix, but it's definitely something truly bad. I feel, and I'm really sorry to, for everyone who's going to be disadvantaged and all the systems out there. I feel for all the IT administrators and security professionals that are going to have to go in and work very long hours and many days, probably weeks, to try and solve these issues, because unfortunately this requires manual intervention and it cannot be done remotely. And well, this is going to put a major strain on Crowdstrike and all the companies around the world that are affected, and pretty much a lot of people, which are not just in the millions, we're talking not just millions of systems, like billions of people are going to be affected, which means you're facing a massive whiplash of massive public scrutiny, all because procedures were not followed, risk management was not done correctly, decision making is a failure, complete failure. And really, George Kurtz, as a CEO, your gaslighting wasn't necessary. That's not what a CEO does. A CEO is the leader of a company. You lead the company even under the worst conditions. If you're taken charge correctly and actually put a task force and fully documented, fully explained everything to people online, got involved, got in the press, got in the media, got on top of this, it would have shown that yes, you are the company that you are. But all it's showing right now is that you are only out for one thing, and that is your shareholders. And shareholders, technically, you have financed a global meltdown. That can't be a good thing to have on your portfolio. And with Vanguard, well, they're a business. They will own companies. They won't change. But at the end of the day, this is going to hurt your stocks as well. So good luck to these companies. But most importantly, I hope everybody else doesn't get disadvantaged to the point where we have loss of life. That's not what we want in this scenario. We want to fix this problem calmly, collectively, and then put the necessary processes and procedures and task forces together and actually come up with a better solution so that Crowdstrike doesn't fall into this mistake again, and also Microsoft systems don't have to rely on systems like Falcon to that level and that degree of depth in the systems, so that if there are any issues in the future, they're easier to manage and deal with. Otherwise, everyone, thank you for listening and watching. I hope that you've learned something new today. Thank you to my followers. Thank you to the new subscribers. I appreciate it. Anybody who's interested and likes my videos, just click on the subscribe and turn on the sort of little activity bell so that you know when my new videos come out. It helps the algorithm tell new people my videos. That's all it is. So I'm hoping to grow my channel, and thank you for your time and thank you for listening. I hope I haven't ranted too much. I've not ranted like yesterday's video, but this is a little bit more informative because we do need a bit more transparency, don't you think? And we do need oversight from the public. I think so. And I think more importantly, management needs to take accountability. It's about time. It's no longer just a technical problem. This is a business problem and a decision problem, and it needs to be dealt with very swiftly, because the last thing you need is something like this to happen when it's an actual coordinated attack, because that could render every system on the world to fail, not just Microsoft systems, both Linux and Mac systems. So you've got to be cautious here. Crowdstrike, CEOs, directors, and also more importantly, all other companies around the world. You guys have got to build your IT teams again. You've got to go back to the basics. You've got to deal with things correctly. Stop trying to just cut corners. Do things the right way. I've been in this industry long enough to see that there's bigger problems looming. Thank you everyone for your time. It's Dimitrios here again, and signing out.